welcome or welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Amy. I am a mum of 2 boys and really happen to love books. So if you would like to see more from me on my cozy little corner of the internet, then please consider liking this video, subscribing. It would mean the world. So today I have been through my spooky recommendations for the autumn season, and now it's time to go through my cozy recommendations. I have my favourite cozy jumper on, and I was gonna have another coffee, but then I thought, do I really want to have 3 coffees in one day? I don't think my body is gonna thank me, so I'm laying off the coffee. But if you haven't already, then grab yourself a hot cozy drink and let's jump into some cozy recommendations to give you that warm fuzzy feeling inside for the autumn season. The first one I'm going to talk about I think is pretty obvious, and it is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This book is so cozy, and it was one of my favourite books of 2023, if not my favourite, and just the vibes of this were absolutely perfect. They were perfection. So we follow Viv, and she is an orc who has been a mercenary with her little band of friends for a very long time, but she has now decided that she is done. She does not want to be part of that life anymore, and she wants to open a coffee shop. It's got a little bit of romance, a little bit of adventure. It's definitely not high stakes fantasy, it is very low stakes, and it's just a perfect cozy atmospheric book. And if anyone is looking for a cozy fantasy and they have not read this, go to the bookshop or to a library and pick this up, because it is absolutely stunning. The next one I want to talk about is Bookshops and Bonedust by Travis Baldree, which is the prequel to Legends and Lattes, and this is set 20 years before the events of Legends and Lattes. Now with this one, I would say it is more of a transitional book from summer into autumn. I would not say it has the same autumn cozy vibes as Legends and Lattes. The cozy, definitely. The autumn, no. Because it is set in a seaside town, it's set in a coastal town, so I immediately think of summer when I think of coastal and seaside, and I think the cover is rather summery as well, with like the shells and everything like that. The bookshop and just the overall vibes, definitely cozy. I would say this is a perfect transitional book from summer into autumn. That's when I read it, and I thought it was perfect timing. If you are happy with the setting being coastal and seaside and that doesn't bother you, then still definitely read this, because the cozy vibes are definitely there still. So the next book I want to talk about is The Illusions by Liz Hyder. Now the details are a little bit hazy because it's been a long time since I've read it, but this book definitely stood out to me, and I remember being amazed after I had read it. And it just makes me think of cobblestones and gas lamps in the 1800s, which is when this is set. And it has to do with magicians and illusions, and that immediately makes me think of autumn. So we are following Cecily. We have dual POVs. We have Cecily, who has unfortunately just lost her mentor in a tragic accident, but because Cecily seems to think that she has some kind of magic power that she doesn't quite understand and doesn't know how to harness, she thinks that the death of her mentor is her fault. So she's now being passed from pillar to post, trying to find her purpose in life after losing her mentor. And we also follow Edie, who is a woman in the videography and photography business, which a woman making a name and money for herself, very, very unheard of in Victorian England. So she's already breaking the mould of society by doing that anyways. And she then meets a man called George, who is an aspiring magician, and he meets with Edie just by chance, and he sees what Edie can do with moving pictures, and he wants to include that in his act. And eventually Edie, Cecily and George, their worlds all collide and their paths cross, and they end up working together to put on this astounding magic show. And this was just, there's so many autumnal vibes in this. I absolutely adored it. So if you want something about a little bit of woman power and women making their place and their mark on the world, then definitely read this one. I have mentioned this book so many times because I got an arc of it through NetGalley and I loved it so much I had to have a physical copy. And then I got the second book in the series, which I haven't read yet. I got that as a Waterstone special edition. So then I had to pick up the first book in a Waterstone special edition, and it is Can't Spell Treason Without T by Rebecca Thorne. This is almost as perfect as Legends and Lattes, almost. The themes are very similar. This has a bit more high stakes. There is a town in trouble, there's dragons, and it's a tea shop instead of a coffee shop. So we follow Raina, who is a guard for the Queen, and this Queen is an absolute tyrant. She is terrible, and after a massacre in front of Raina, she decides that she has had enough and she is going to leave the kingdom with her lover. This is a sapphic novel, and we also have Kianth, who is kind of like the Archmage. She is one of the most powerful mages in all the realm. They have been hiding their relationship for the past 2 years, and they have finally decided that they don't want to be a part of what they are doing anymore. So they pack up shop with their horse and their griffin, and they go to a new town and start up a tea and a bookshop. And this had so many cozy vibes in it. I absolutely loved it, and I cannot wait to read the second one. I think it is very similar to Legends and Lattes, and the second one, which is A Pirate's Life for Tea. I think A Pirate's Life for Tea is going to be very cozy, like Can't Spell Treason Without Tea, but because it's got pirates and it's on a ship, I'm going to associate it more with summer, but I still might read it just for the cozy vibes anyways. So, I have 3 books in a series that I want to talk about now, and these were just as cozy as each other in their own ways. They all had separate storylines. They are interconnected storylines. Interconnected standalones, I should say. And that is the Mead Mishap series by Kimberly Lemming. So we have That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon. So in this one, we are following Cinnamon, and she wanders into the woods one day after getting very, very drunk and ends up saving a demon from a charm he is under by throwing cinnamon in his face, which somehow stops the charm from working. And Fallon, who is the name of the demon, ends up just falling head over heels for her, and they go on a little adventure together. And the cozy vibes in this entire series were just out of this world. I absolutely loved them, and the names of the characters, the female main characters, are just unbelievable. So we've got That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon. Second book, That Time I Got Drunk and Yeeted a Love Potion at a Werewolf, is just as cozy, and we are following Bree, and Bree hasn't had much luck in love, and the one person who is trying to pursue her, she is not interested in whatsoever. So he decides to try and drug Bree with a love potion. However, Bree is a clever girl, and she figures out that it's a love potion and yeets it at the man who's tried to drug her, but ends up hitting a werewolf in the head with it. And the werewolf then thinks that Bree is the love of his life. So their adventure is her trying to convince this werewolf Felix that she is not the love of his life, it's just the love potion, and it will soon wear off. And then the last book in the series is That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Human. So we follow Cherry in this book, and she has been trapped on an island with a dragon guarding her. She has tried multiple times to escape, but ends up giving up at the last minute. But this time she is absolutely determined that this is the moment that she is going to escape from this island. And then a dragon called Dante comes along and says, I can take you home. But she had already gotten him drunk at that point to try and get him to take her home anyways, even though he was going to say normally, let me take you home. And as most of these stories have gone, as you probably guessed, they do end up falling for each other. So yeah, Cherry ends up being Dante's fated mate, and it explores. This one's a bit more chunky than the other ones, so it explores a lot more thoughts and feelings of, hang on, I've just escaped from this island and now you're telling me that I'm your fated mate. How do I process all of that? So I loved every single one of these books. I thought they were absolutely phenomenal. So you guys might be wondering, Amy, why have you not got your Plaits in? I'll tell you why. Because I went to edit this yesterday, and the first half, perfection. Edited it without a hitch. Second half, blurry. And I tried every trick in the book to try and fix it, and it did not work. So here we are, filming the second half of this video. So that is why the lighting might be different, the angle might be different, and I look different. So apologies for that, but let's jump straight back in. The next book I want to talk about is Coraline by Neil Gaiman. Now this wasn't my favourite. I just don't think Neil Gaiman is a writer for me personally. But I did really enjoy the premise of this book. So we follow Coraline, and she, with her mum and her dad, have moved into this ground floor flat, and her parents don't really pay her much attention. They just kind of leave her to her own devices unless they are taking her for back to school shopping, back to school supplies. They don't really give her much attention. They're more focused on their work. So she begins to explore the house, and outside of the house she goes and sees her new neighbours, who she finds very harrowing. I would say this is a mix between cosy and spooky. It definitely gives that cosy vibes because it's the time of year going back to school and crunchy leaves outside and everything like that. And then one day, while she's exploring, Coraline discovers a door into another world where her other parents live, and her other mother is determined to keep Coraline for herself. And it's very, very harrowing, but also quite cosy as well, just the way things are described. So I cannot fault Neil Gaiman's writing style in terms of immersion. I just think certain aspects aren't for me personally, and that's okay, but I would still put this on any spooky or cosy TBR. Now these next three I don't actually have physical copies of. I'm debating getting physical copies because I love them so much. I got these as ARCs through NetGalley, and the first one I want to talk about is Cursed Under London by Gabby Hutchinson Crouch. The found family in this is what makes the coziness. It's just absolutely gorgeous, and I was almost on the verge of tears by the end of this book, which I was not expecting. So we follow our main character Lazar, and he is kind of a vampire but kind of not. He doesn't have fangs, but he has these giant bat wings, and he is a bit self-conscious about them. He spends a lot of his time trying to hide them, and he has just been given the gift of immortality. And while he is out in Lower London one day, so there are two levels in this story. There is, I can't remember the exact term, but there's basically an upper and lower level, and Lower London is where all of the magical creatures live. So vampires, zombies, dragons, they all live in the lower part of London, and then in the upper part of London, that is where the standard humans live, bar a few exceptions, such as a talking swan who is a guard for Queen Elizabeth I. I just think it's so funny, and I don't know what it is about creatures that can talk, but they do give me autumnal vibes. I'm not sure why. I've just always kind of made that association. So while Lazar is out exploring Lower London one day, he meets Fang, who is also immortal, and through Fang he meets Nell, who is a friend of Fang, who is a pharmacist, and he also befriends a dragon called Amber. And they have heard about Fey weaponry being illegally smuggled. They go to investigate, and they end up finding a half-elf child in a box. And this book focuses on them trying to take this child home back to the elves, and they end up becoming her family for a while. And it's got the perfect mix of spooky but cozy as well. I loved this so much. At first I wasn't sure if I was going to like it, but then by the end I really hope there's another book, because this tugged on my heartstrings a little bit. So I would definitely recommend it for spooky and cozy season. Next is The Resurrectionist by Rae Dunlap. I mean, if this cover, it's the perfect kind of spooky, cosy mix, I think. And this is about body snatching. And I know you're probably thinking, well, surely that should be in the spooky section, surely. I do kind of understand, but the vibe that this story gives, it just immediately takes me to a cosy place. So we're following James, and he is a very full of himself, stuck-up aristocrat from Bristol. And he has tried many, many career paths, but he has decided that he wants to pursue anatomy. And this is much to the dismay of his family, and he has been convinced by his family that his choices caused his father's death, so they use his choices against him. But he still decides to go to Edinburgh, where some of the best anatomical doctors reside, and he goes there to be taught. And so once he gets to Edinburgh, and I don't know what it is about Edinburgh and Scotland, but I think it's just because there's so much history, it just really makes me think of autumn, because there's a lot of ghost stories and everything like that, and the cobblestone streets. It makes me think of in Victorian times where you had to walk along the cobbled streets and there was gas lamps rather than light bulbs and everything like that. It just made me think of autumn, and it's obviously set in the start of the academic year as well. So he goes to Edinburgh to start his new studies, and he ends up meeting another man called Aneurin. And he actually James finds out that Aneurin is the assistant to Dr. Malmstrom, who is the doctor that will be teaching him anatomy. And long story short, James gets brought into this world of body snatching, because where else would these cadavers be coming from? And there is also a very special appearance in this story from the legendary Burke and Hare, who were very, very famous body snatchers during the 1800s in Scotland, I think in England as well, and they were actually hung for it. So that was a very, very cool historical twist, which I loved. But this book just gave me so many cosy vibes because of, going to, an inn and having a hot meal and drinks with your friends and starting the new academic year. It was just perfect. I thought it was a really, really, really good book. Next one. Now this is the ultimate cosy of cosy out of these three arcs that I received, and it is called Fourth of Fox by Markelle Grabo. I think that's how you pronounce their name, or Marcel. This was just so cosy. So this is a fairy tale retelling, and we follow Roisin and Eowyn. So Roisin likes to go by Ro, and they live in a little secluded cottage in the forest in the town of Maple. That's right, the town's called Maple. It's immediately a cosy autumn read for me if a town's called Maple. So their mother has gone off to try and find a better life for them, so she is in a new town, and by the winter, Roisin and Eowyn must go and join their mother. But as of right now, they are fending for themselves in the forest, and one day Roisin is out foraging in the woods as normal, and she finds a copper fox. And there's something seems to be off about this fox. So Roisin follows it, and she ends up coming face to face with a grizzly bear. I know, a great start to this story. Luckily, Eowyn has followed Roisin into the woods and ends up shooting this bear with an arrow. And then chaos ensues when they find out that the grizzly bear has turned into a young boy. So Eowyn takes pity on this boy because she has just shot him and she doesn't know if she's killed him or not. So they take him back to their little cottage. She heals him, and all this boy knows when he wakes up is that 1, his name is Brend, and 2, he is cursed. So all of them kind of band together and end up becoming this little found family, and they work together to find out why Brend is cursed and how to break it. And just the vibes of this, the writing was so whimsical and poetic, and I felt like I was sat by a fire with them, eating a bowl of soup or broth with them, and it was just absolutely stunning, and I loved the ending of this book. I thought it was really, really good. So the next book I didn't get as an ARC, I lent it through the library, so I don't have a physical copy. But it is Hester by Laurie, Lico, Albenese. That's a mouthful. So we follow Isabel and her husband Edward, and after Edward has gotten himself in some hot water with some gambling debts, they decide to flee to Salem, Massachusetts. Now Isabel is a very special individual because she has something called synesthesia, which is where she associates and sees colours in reference to certain things. So it could be, in modern day now, it could be numbers or feelings or words. And in Isabel's case, it is words and people and how they are feeling. They kind of let off this aura that she can see that are different colours. And she is also a very experienced and very skillful seamstress. And when she was younger, she tried to incorporate her synesthesia into her work quite openly, but her mother said, no, I don't want you being seen as a witch, keep it hidden. So Isabel finds ways to incorporate her synesthesia very discreetly into her work. And the reason why Isabel's mother is so scared about her being tried as a witch is because one of their ancestors was actually tried as a witch, but she escaped her execution. She ran away before she could be executed. So they are fled to Salem, Massachusetts, and then Edward gets swiftly taken away on a medicinal trip to different islands to see if he can find new medicinal plants, and Isabel is left alone. And she begins to sew, and her work is soon recognised, but she is basically, she's fobbed off. Basically, the seamstress in the town knows that she is new, knows that she is vulnerable, so she takes credit for most of Isabel's work and doesn't give her the full credit. And then one day Isabel meets Nathaniel, who is an aspiring writer, but he is also a descendant of a Salem witch trial judge. And if you remember me saying, Isabel is a descendant of a witch. So you don't think that this is going to go well, but they do end up getting feelings for each other. And the majority of this book is them trying to explore those feelings, because Isabel she's still married, bearing in mind. So yeah, this book explores a lot of different themes, mainly prejudice for being different and having special skills that some people might see as threatening. This was a beautiful book. It was so beautifully written and it explores lots of different themes. There are some scenes in this which are quite difficult and might need a trigger warning, so I would definitely recommend looking up trigger warnings for this book if you think it might make you feel uncomfortable, but it was beautiful. The next book I want to talk about is one I finished a few days ago, and it is A Fellowship of Bakers and Magic by J. Penner. This is like Legends and Lattes but with Bake Off instead of a coffee shop. I really, really like this. I rated it 4 stars, so it wasn't quite Legends and Lattes worthy, but it was still beautiful nonetheless. So we follow Arletta, and she is a very, very talented baker, but she's not given enough credit, and she's lost both of her parents, so she's fending for herself, and she is very young in this story. I think she's only like 18, I think. So she's trying to sell her baked goods, but because she's fending for herself, she finds herself running late quite a lot. So the owner of the stalls is very rude to her, gives her an awful booth right in the corner where no one can see her, and he charges her an insane amount of rent. So her next door neighbours, who have kind of acted like her adopted dads for a long time, they've looked after her and make sure she's fed and that she's okay and she has someone to talk to. They put her name down for the Langheim baking competition without her knowing. And that is until one day a very handsome elf called Theo comes knocking at her door and says, "I'm here to take you to the baking competition." And so the adventure begins. And it was very predictable. I could tell what was going to happen from about 70 pages in, but it was still beautiful nonetheless, and it was so cute. And found family is very prominent throughout this, and the cosy vibes were almost immaculate. Almost. So I would definitely recommend reading this. And the last book on my list is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Now, a fun fact, my middle name actually comes from Wuthering Heights. My middle name is Catherine because when my mum was pregnant, she was reading this. I think this might be the exact copy that she was reading actually. This is very stained, very yellowed. So we follow Cathy and Heathcliff. Heathcliff is found as a young boy. He's lost both of his parents, so he's kind of been wandering from pillar to post for many years. That is until Cathy's family take him in as kind of like, almost like a servant, almost. But then him and Cathy start to develop feelings for one another. They're best friends, but they realise that there is something more there. But because of the difference in social class, they can't be together. And because of the expectations of society, they can't be together. And this book just explores their relationship throughout their lives and the emotions that come with that, you know, being so in love with somebody but knowing you can't have them. It's very, very sad, but it's set on the moors and there are thunderstorms, there are rain-filled evenings, and it's just, the cosy vibes are just perfection in this. And it is a classic. I would say it's more of a gothic classic, but I don't really want to do a video on gothic classics because I don't think I've got enough books that are considered gothic, so I'm just going to include it in the cosy list instead. That was all of the cosy books that I recommend you read this season. I hope that this has given you guys some inspiration, and if you guys have any cosy recommendations to read this season, then please leave them in the comments. I would love to hear what you think. So I'm going to wrap this video up here. Please hit like and subscribe if you want to see more from my channel, and I will see you very soon in the next video. Bye!